This is a clip from the Joint House inquiry. Fred Thompson interviews Director George Tenet of the CIA and Robert Mueller of the FBI.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, thank you very much, and thank you for your public service. Mr. Tenet, I'd say to you that Homeland Security will make a difference if it ever passes. I was stricken by the proposition earlier by one of the questions that we should have accountability, and frankly, I agree with that concept. But I must say that if the type person in question was a part of the Homeland Security Department under current law, you could look forward to 1 year's notice of their deficiencies, several levels of appeal, several hours or days before appeal examiners, and an average of about 18 months before you could do anything with that person. Now, this is the Department of Homeland Security that we're debating right now. And we've just been told by the director of the CIA that we're about at the same level of concern as we were last summer. And we're debating issues like that as to how many levels of appeal someone should have, or whether or not the new office should have the flexibility to devise a new system that might have some semblance to this century. But we haven't gotten there yet. But perhaps your testimony today will help us get there. I might ask you, Mr. Tenet, in view of your analysis of where we are in comparison to last year, I take note of what I believe I recall is the level of warning out of the Office of Homeland Security, a yellow level, I believe, nationally. It doesn't seem that that's really consistent with what you said. Do you think the level should be higher, or are we talking about different things?
Sir, I'm going to be, Tom Ridge and I will be meeting this afternoon. He's already taken measures in specific sectors where we're most worried about. There'll be another discussion this evening and tomorrow, but I would note to you, when you see the multiple attacks that you've seen occur around the world, from Bali to Kuwait, number of failed attacks that have been attempted, the various messages that have been issued by senior al-Qaeda leaders, you must make the assumption that al-Qaeda is in an execution phase and intends to strike us both here and overseas. That's unambiguous as far as I am concerned. The governor has taken measures already in specific areas where the intelligence was most credible and in sectors that we're most worried about. And so we'll continue to talk about this, but I'm deeply concerned about where we are and the time period ahead of us.
So you're looking at concerns both within the United States, continental United States, and abroad?
Sir, one of the things that we can never forget is the specificity of what we see overseas may not be matched by the specificity of what you see here. If you go back to the narrative before 9/11 and you saw what was going on overseas, you must make the analytical judgment that the possibility exists that people are planning to attack you inside the United States. Multiple simultaneous attacks. We are the enemy. We're the people they want to hurt inside this country. So we extrapolate, but in the world I live with, you have to pay a lot of attention to what's going on overseas.
Well, guess what? We had the intelligence that was coming from overseas, and your station withheld it. I'm talking about Alex Station at the Counterterrorism Center, which was under the direction of two men who was the deputy chiefs, Michael Scheuer, and later Richard Blee, who replaced him in 1999. And it was your station in 1999 which held information from the FBI who were working there, and you are the director. So it all falls on you. You basically committed perjury here in Joint House Inquiry and 9/11 Commission regarding nobody reading the cables about Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi's U.S. dual visas and whether they were inside the United States. Now, even though they came inside the United States, you still withheld that information from the FBI when they had jurisdiction and you did not. So this diatribe you're elucidating to Fred Thompson here reeks of hypocrisy because you don't share information. And this is the problem that's going to be brought up in just a minute by Thompson.
I don't think you could be any clearer, Mr. Tenet. And I think you were pretty clear in the summer of last year. I don't know in my recollection how public you were about that, but my recollection is that within the intelligence community and with regard to the administration and others, you made that assessment at that time too. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you along those lines something that I think that we're all wondering, and that is what we have a right as a nation to expect out of our intelligence community. It seems to me that on occasion, the community has gotten very, very good intelligence. My recollection is that before the attack on the US Cole, that we had a lot of information that we were in danger in that area. We knew that Yemen was a hotbed. We knew that our presence was targeted and all of that. Before September 11th of last year, we also had lots of information. In fact, we had lots of patterns. Patterns, dots within a sea of patterns and dots, but yet there were some emerging patterns, such as New York, such as Washington, D.C., such as our infrastructure, such as airplanes, things of that nature. And it built pretty much to a crescendo right at that time. So it seems to me like that on more than one occasion, we have gotten a lot of information. A lot of it is in the ballpark. A lot of it turns out to be good information. And that we've even been able to separate it out from all of the vast volumes of information that come in. But we can't pinpoint times and places. We all know how difficult that is. We all know that this information is coming in along with lots and lots and lots of other information. One of you gentlemen have said in times past that you were actually drowning in information.
Oh, they were drowning, all right. In fact, the NSA, who they barely mentioned or interview, in which Director Michael Hayden is sitting right next to the left of George Tenet, to the right, basically had so much metadata, according to former senior executive Thomas Drake, that the NSA couldn't transcribe it all. Even though when it was transcribed to a hard drive, and when Thomas Drake showed it to Maureen Baginski, his superior, she basically told him, Tom, I wish you hadn't seen this. And basically, because she no longer had plausible deniability, because the NSA were listening to the Yemen hub, which was the Al-Qaeda communications hub in Yemen, as well as bin Laden's satellite phone for many years. And I've talked about this many times. Regarding the CIA, well, we had plenty of metadata there regarding signals and human intelligence. In fact, they put a bug inside the house of Yemen, as well as conducting human intelligence about the coming and goings of people who were coming inside and outside the house since 1999. None of this data between the NSA, the CIA, and if we had foreign intelligence involved, we don't know if that's public yet or whether they did or not. I'm assuming they didn't share with anybody else. Nobody shared nothing because we have a systematic problem of agencies hating within each other. And of course, this leads to the conspiracy of whether certain people in certain agencies who were taking orders from above, I'm talking about the highest levels of the federal government, that's the Bush White House, who were also friends with foreign countries in allowing certain attacks to transpire, maybe even manipulating the plans. Now, of course, it's speculation, but it's reasonable. Now, we don't know if that's the evidence, which would, really make 9/11 a bigger conspiracy as it is. But at the very least, we have malfeasance here. And George Tenet basically perjured himself a couple of times here in the Joint House and 9/11 Commission. So, plenty of data regarding the hijackers. In fact, the NSA, for example, had the specific times and dates of the plane tickets that were purchased by members of the Hamburg cell and Khalid al-Mihdhar Nawaf Azmi. Those specifics, whether they were known to Thompson or not, I'm guessing he doesn't, because the NSA had those specifics. That's why Thomas Drake said the NSA shared that data with the FBI or the State Department, could have stopped 9/11 altogether. I would believe Thomas Drake because the NSA made him a scapegoat and arrested him on for fictitious charges and almost ruined his life.
We also had a lot of general information, I might add, about the nature of the attack, the fact that Osama bin Laden had held a press conference in '98.
Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention the want to use planes as weapons was known, as I've always stated, back in 1996 with the Pajinka plot, which was uncovered by the Philippines National Police, and their final draft report from Rodolfo Mendoza was given to the FBI, and the FBI did squat with it. So the FBI also doesn't have clean hands here. Nobody, you can't feign ignorance when the dots, as Thompson would say, were that the information was there. They were training at flight schools. That's in the Phoenix memo. That's in the Gerald Shea memo about Israeli spies inside the United States, Saudi spies who were basically helping to finance at least Khalid al-Mihdhar Nawaf Azmi, in which that money was coming from a bank account from the wife of U.S. Ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Bandar bin Sultan, close friend to the Bush family.
Saying he was going to attack us. You declared war in '98. In effect, all of that is out there. And yet, the question is, how much good does that do us unless we can take that next step?
Hey, good question.
Are we entitled to expect that next step? What do we have a right to expect of our intelligence community with regard to predicting time and place of a major terrorist attack?
Well, let's talk about that for a minute before Tenet speaks on it. Specifics. This is what drives all intelligence agencies, right? Information, because when an intelligence agency, in fact, information in general is power, especially when it comes to foreknowledge of an event before it takes place. Because with information, you can control kings and queens and presidents, world leaders. That's why the most powerful entities on the face of the earth are intelligence agencies. And if you don't believe me, you should ask the Clinton administration, in which they forced him to resign.
Mr. Tenet, I'll ask you first.
It is the most difficult thing to do is have that date, time, and place of event. We have.
Yeah, this is the conspiracy, right? I hate to pause it, but this is the wide open for conspiracy, right? Now, I believe, now I'm going to tell you my opinion, right? What I'm speculating. With the NSA having a wiretap on bin Laden's satellite phone and a house in Yemen, on the phone line in Yemen, the Al-Qaeda communication hub, what do you think Al-Qaeda was talking about in those phones? What do you think bin Laden was talking about? Operations, specific times and dates of operations, right? Using primitive code, okay? We're talking about the CIA, the NSA. Now, their excuses were, oh, the data was too much. We didn't have the manpower to read it. We need more money. We need more manpower, which they did during both the inquiries. They complained about that. But they also complained about having a lack of Arab linguists. Now, this is a problem echoed by the FBI as well, including Ali Soufan, who was part of the New York Counterterrorism Office. Even Mark Rossini complained about that too. But that was the FBI. You would think the CIA, which has a much bigger budget and who has a base station or a station in every single major city or capital in the world, and basically, I would think over 100 stations in the Middle East would have Arab linguists.
You have to be able to take all of this data. You have to be able to then analytically assess a target set that it may be applied against. You have to go protect that target set, because the truth is there'll be dates and times and all kinds of information, and it'll never happen on the date and time. And then the date and time will elapse. And then people will basically say, I guess it's not going to happen. You have to expect us to tell you honestly, in strategic terms, this is where I think the sector of the attack is going to be. This is what I know their training and methodology has been. This is my best judgment about what you have to go protect. Go protect it. Now, in the overseas environment today, I mean, it would be useful at some point to come out and sit down. There's a great deal of specificity overseas about places and times and events, and the pattern of racing to stop it has been pretty successful. You go back and look at this recent French tanker, and the reporting out there on the French tanker was 2 or 3 months old, but it was there. This is a place and a location that we are worried about commercial shipping and tanker traffic. And so you see, it stretches out over time. What we owe you always, and what we have to work harder to do, is our best strategic judgment about what the it is. And
Well,
then,
Well, let me speak on just, for example, he's remarking about the intelligence and way we could stop certain events overseas has been successful. All right, let's talk about the 1996 Khobar Tower bombing, which took place in Riyadh, in which terrorists that was blamed on Hezbollah as well, in which the Saudis basically killed all the suspects involved before the FBI even interviewed them and said, well, these weren't Salafists when they actually were. What happened was the FBI investigated this incident, and the director at the time was Louis Freeh. And Louis Freeh basically was friends with the deputy prime minister, Bin Sultan bin Abdul Al-Aziz Al Saud. And the FBI had a really good, especially Louis Freeh, had a good relationship with the king of Saudi Arabia, King Fahd. And this investigation was subjugated by not just the FBI, but the Saudis. They didn't allow the FBI to interview people who lived nearby Khobar Towers. The neighbors were uncooperative. They were threatened by Saudi GID officials. That's the intelligence arm, the General Intelligence Directorate, headed by Prince Turki bin Faisal. And they were circumvented. And the FBI basically complained about this, saying we're not getting much in the way of cooperation from the Saudis. And Louis Freeh basically said, we're closing the case. Saudis took care of it. And what they did was they arrested a whole bunch of people, probably tortured them to confess, and executed all of them. And I think it was like 22 people, something like that. So that's what happened. But the blame was on a bunch of non-Salafists. So what they didn't want was basically the Saudis didn't want to admit that it was a bunch of Saudi jihadists, which is what most terrorist groups are based on. They're based on the Wahhabi ideology. And they didn't want the United States to show the embarrassment that, yeah, there's a problem in Saudi Arabia. These militants are Saudis. Because we would take one look at Saudi Arabia and say, oh, this is where the problem is coming from. We better start investigating Saudi Arabia, or even worse, we need to hold them responsible and not do business deals with them, or probably sell them weapons in the future. And so the Saudis basically executed these people and blamed it on Hezbollah al-Hajjaz, which is a group based out of Beirut, a militant Shia organization. And, you know, yeah, there's Shia militants, but they're not really terrorists. I mean, they're basically fighting against Saudi militants. And currently we're seeing that in Syria, where members of Hezbollah in Lebanon and Iran are fighting against the Islamic State, or the Jabhat al-Nusra, goes by so many different names now because they change their name so nobody knows who they are. They can't investigate them. And so what happens is you have secret covert operations. First of all, you have U.S. operations who are fighting the jihadists in Syria, and behind the back door, you have, the CIA who are basically arming or training and using the Gulf to send them weapons, whatnot, to these groups to help overthrow the Assad government because they're Alawites, they're Shiite, right? And they're allies to Iran. And when you look at the greater geopolitical goal, is that because our allies are the Gulf, the Saudi Arabia, because we do business deals with them, we regulate the oil market, we sell them hundreds of millions of dollars of weapon, we rather protect them than Iran. And that comes from the Israeli lobby too. So all this comes into play in regards to having certain events not properly investigated. And then we have agencies like CIA who are basically collecting information and not sharing it with the domestic or state agency, right? The State Department or the FBI. And when the FBI does investigate overseas, they're not getting the cooperation they need. Excuse me. So George Tenet is, all this gish gallop about, we share information. No, they don't.
Are we getting any closer? You
Yes,
talked
sir.
about isolating
Yes, sir.
sectors, because before September 11, with all of that information out there that you had collected, you still weren't at all sure that it was going to be domestic. In fact, I think it's fair to say most people thought it would be foreign.
That's right. This is a good point that Thompson brings up, because this is one of the primary arguments of why the FBI couldn't share information regarding Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. Now, I've said it many times, and I'll bring it up again real short, is that when the cable came in about the CIA getting photographs of Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi's passports, and they had U.S. visas, that information was also read by an FBI agent named Doug Mueller, who was taxed to Alex Station. And he tried to draft a cable warning FBI, hey, they're coming inside the United States. And the cable was not sent because they needed approval from the CIA. And the deputy director of Alex Station, Tom Wilshire, who's second in command, basically told one of his analysts, Michelle Ann Casey, to write on the cable, please hold off per Wilshire. Please hold off per Wilshire. And Mark Rossini complained about why the information wasn't sent to the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. And Michelle Ann Casey told him, because we think the next attack is happening in Southeast Asia. It's not the FBI's jurisdiction, which would be right. This is the CIA's jurisdiction, which means that they could control the information and freeze out the FBI. Because if they shared the information and told the FBI, yes, they're coming inside the United States, that means the FBI's jurisdiction, and that they can detain or start monitoring Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi inside the United States. Why? That's a good question.
And right up until very close to the end, you were talking about against the United States or Israeli interests. We weren't even sure it was United States. So are we getting any closer to pinpointing the sector, the country, domestic or foreign, city, anything of that nature?
Sir, you're getting, by virtue of what you've done in Afghanistan, by virtue of the over 3,000 people we've taken into custody around the world, by virtue of the senior leadership.
Yeah, and how many were innocent, right? 775 people at Guantanamo. Now I think it's 36. A lot of these people were innocent, in which the CIA, under authorization by White House legal counsel, like Attenborough, I forgot his first name, and John Yoo, who basically authorized the torture memos, which were headed under Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, to allow excessive enhanced interrogation techniques, in other words, torture, to extract information from these people who confessed to crimes that they had no part of, or that they falsified information, which led to the Iraq war, right? Because they tortured Sheikh Ibn al-Libi, and he basically told them whatever he wanted. Oh, you want, oh yeah, that's right. Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, yeah, they were making chemical weapons and biological weapons. We went to war on that when 1 million people were killed, over 1 million. And the information was false.
That we are all getting information from today, the texture and quality when coupled to the real-time intelligence collection is an order of magnitude different than it was before 9/11. The quality in your knowledge is miles down the road, and the pace of operations around the world has given us an enormous amount of information. It really allows us to think about this in a much more strategic and focused way. And we are getting better. But to come back to your Homeland Security point, you better get that done, because the strategic threat is unambiguous. You better have the mechanism in place to start locking down where we can tell you. And we think with some high confidence, we can work with the private sector and go through sectors and identify vulnerabilities to say, go lock it down now. Don't wait for us to come tell you it's on top of you, because you can't work that way, sir.
I might point out too that some of the things we're trying to do in Homeland Security will not be within any continuing resolution. And passing of continuing resolutions is just going to, even if we do something later, just going to move the solution further down the road under the category of.
Let me give you a laundry list of operations that the intelligence community basically have foreknowledge about, right? 1993 World Trade Center bombing. I mean, you had an Israeli Mossad agent living with Mohammed Salameh, who is suspected to be one of the people involved in the bombing. He got 260 years, and he basically rented the Ryder truck, which was used to house the, 14 canisters of uranium nitrate, which was constructed by Ramzi Youssef and Ahmed Ajaj, who basically, Ahmed Ajaj was also an Israeli Mossad or Israeli asset stooge, because the Israeli Mossad recruited him out of jail to become an informant for them and to play the part of a militant. Now, that's not me making stuff up. That's even reported by Robert Friedman in an article written, I think, in the New York Times or the New Yorker, something like that. What else? I mean, basically, you know, this. And by the way, the CIA was basically funneling money to the Maktab al-Kidmat office in New York, which was the Al Farouk Mosque, which was right next door to the Al Kifa Refugee Center, which was basically the arm of Maktab al-Kidmat. You had the FBI basically scouting the members of the mosque at the Al Farouk Mosque and also the Masjid al-Salam in Jersey City. What else could I bring up? 1996 Khobar Towers, I just mentioned. In fact, the Israelis basically allegedly were monitoring the members of this group who carried out this attack and knew about it and didn't warn the FBI. Goodness gracious. 2000 Millennium Plot. Jordanian intelligence broke that intelligence ring up, and basically, thank goodness to one border agent in British Columbia, a woman who found a bomb in the truck, in a car, hidden in the wheel of Ahmed Bassam's vehicle. 9/11 is the biggest intelligence failure of all. You had numerous agencies, in fact, 2 of them, NSA and CIA, who basically, I believe, had foreknowledge of the event, because who told the Saudis and Israelis to monitor the hijackers inside the United States from day one? Would they just get lucky?
Things we have learned. I'd like to try something out on you and get your.
Of course, the 7/7 bombing, which was the Madrid bombings, in which Spanish intelligence basically were monitoring these guys, and they ran drills on the same day of the bombing about train bombs. Goodness gracious.
Various reactions. Anyone who wants to react. It seems that our nation is dangerously slow to react to a major threat to our national security. You mentioned sanctuaries. As I look at this in terms of accountability, I look at a lot of different places. I look at the executive branch. I look at the legislative branch. I look at the organizations that you gentlemen represent. But with regard to the executive branch, we watched, correct me if I'm wrong, we watched Osama bin Laden build an army and indoctrinate, train, and build an army basically for 5 or 6 years in Afghanistan, did we not?
Yes, sir.
Can we, if we had a perfect intelligence community here, could we protect ourselves if we allowed sanctuaries such as that?
No.
Well, moving down a little bit further, we know that it's not just Afghanistan. We know that there are friendly countries, friends of ours, that to one extent or another are allowing terrorist presence.
Oh,
They allow free passage. The Bremer Commission has pointed this out. We depend on them, as you have pointed out, and have depended on them for some of our successes and cooperation. But I wonder if, regardless of what kind of cooperation we might get on individual cases, these so-called friendly countries are allies. Can we fully address the problem until we convince those countries, many of them with growing Muslim populations? I'm not sure that that's going to reverse itself. Some of them under political pressures.
oh, just say it. Saudi Arabia, for God's sake, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates. Good Lord, don't be afraid. Yeah, these aren't our friends. And they're enemies, actually. We have nothing in common with them. That's the reason why their lobby is basically a shadow lobby of lawyers and corporations, but they have the money. Israel is a poor country. They don't have money. But what they do have is a remarkably strong tech industry regarding intelligence, covert operations, black ops. That's what they excel in. And so espionage. So they're great at that. I mean, the covert units I talk about sometimes, like Unit 8200 or the Mr. Avrim, where you have covert Israelis living amongst the Arab populations to look like them and sound like them. Remarkable accuracy in regards to blending in and collecting intelligence about groups like Hamas or Hezbollah or the Palestinian Islamic or organizations, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, so forth, right? But they can operate on the world theater. And there was a 2000 document by the Department of the Army in which they remarked about the Arab intelligence units that I wish I knew the name of the document or the news article that talked about this, because one of the authors of the report basically said that they were so impressed with the Israelis that they were made to look like Arabs, sound like Arabs, and conduct operations looking like Arab terrorists. So that's to keep in mind, by the way.
Until they start cooperating more with us. Notice in 1996, Congress authorized the president to delineate these countries as not cooperating fully. I don't know that that's been really utilized at all. Can we give our friendly countries a pass on this? Are we inviting another level of sanctuary? While it might not be a country taken over.
Hey, let me just bring this up right away. I mean, Saudi Arabia is the biggest example here. All right. When it comes to the broader picture of here, we're talking about the political state, the geopolitical state. Okay. There is more at stake when it comes to money and when it comes to regional power. and when it comes to world governments. This is the reason why the intelligence units like the CIA and the NSA are used to collect information and give it to the highest levels of government, and they can act on an event before it even happens, right? So if they knew about 9/11, for example, they knew about 9/11 was going to happen beforehand, they can implement such as the Patriot Act, a war on Iraq, a war on Afghanistan, future wars such as Syria, Libya, Pakistan, Yemen, Sudan. The expansion of the military industrial complex, millions, billions, trillions at stake. I mean, we spent $3 trillion in Afghanistan. Millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars went to the pockets, the coffers of Halliburton, LG3 Technologies, Raytheon, Boeing in producing tanks, jeeps, bullets, missiles. I'm not even bringing up the technological advancements, heat-seeking missiles, heat-seeking radar, boots, uniforms, all this. So much money is involved. And I'm not even talking about the money that's exchanging hands in regards to the Afghan warlords who are getting paid to help the United States to do operations like I did yesterday in the live discussion, Operation Jawbreaker. We gave millions of dollars to warlords like Harman Karzai and Rashid Dotson. God's sakes, man, there was so much money at stake regarding the Middle East, especially Iraq, Afghanistan. Just ridiculous. Rewards program for handing in alleged terrorists, which were basically Pashtun farmers who had nothing to do with terrorism, but they were hated by more powerful warlords and went to take over their land or whatever. So much factors at play here, right? So we're not talking about honest information sharing, which could help the American people become safer because they don't give a two diddly squats about your safety. They could have stopped 9/11 from happening. And that's coming from the intelligence people who were involved with the NSA, with the FBI. So you know how many whistleblowers? I interviewed some of them. Colleen Rowley, Mark Rossini, Ken Williams. Their warnings were ignored about Al-Qaeda here in the United States. Good grief.
But it doesn't have to be in order
And
to
that's why
pose
we
a.
protect Saudi Arabia, right? Because it's much more beneficial for the government to protect Saudis than to have them investigated and basically hurt us in regards to the oil market or in regards to losing an entire country who is basically one of the primary purchasers of American grade weaponry. I mean, for example, we just authorized $650 million arms sales to Saudi Arabia, in which Rand Paul, a Republican, and Bernie Sanders, a lit Democrat, tried to suspend the sale. And they're trying to suspend that sale from being authorized. And all of that money is going to be used to continue the largest humanitarian crisis in the world in the war on Yemen. Not so much about suppressing the Houthis because they have connections to Iran. And that's the reason why they're attacking them. Nefarious issues at play here. They don't care about the American people. They don't care about people in general. These are sociopaths. A lot of these people.
A big danger. Where do we stand on this?
Sir, I would say that number one, we do not have the luxury of basically walking away of any of these places and not continuing to press them to do better all the time. There's no alternative. So engagement is absolutely the key here. In the pre-9/11 environment, there were lots of people around the world who believed that this was all about either killing Americans or killing Israelis. It's not my problem. Okay? And everybody's mindset has now been transformed. And if you've got to do this with the carrot, and if there's a stick, you have to have a stick. But we have to stay engaged in places where you could, we could be 100,000 people all around the world. You need to get into those places and have those societies change their laws. And there.
How do you change Saudi Arabia, which is based on the premise of the kingdom and the religious sector, right? So Saudi Arabia was founded on the principles of King Abdulaziz ibn Saud and Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, okay? When they created the Emirate of Diriyah, which was the name of the first Saudi state, right? They made a pact in 1744, I believe, in which they said that it was agreed upon the two men that Ibn Saud would head government matters, military matters, and Al-Wahhab would head the religious authority, the Ulema, in other words, that they would be in charge of civil matters, okay? And so that that construction, right, this dual entity worked as one. And it's the only country that's a true monarchy, right? They're a true theocratic state. And it hasn't changed since that day. They made that pact. And this Wahhabi ideology is anti-Islamic. Nothing Islamic about it. It is based on the tenets of Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Hanbal, okay? Now, that's the Hadiths. Ibn Taymiyyah is not a Hadith scholar. He's not in a book of the Hadiths. He's a scholar of the Hadiths. And there's many Sunni jurisprudence scholars who basically condemn his works because they are anti-ethical to what the Prophet Muhammad decreed in the Quran. And so you have a majority of the Sunni world who condemn the Wahhabis because that's a branch of Sunni Islam. Who do we blame? Saudi Arabia. That's who you blame. How do you change a culture like that, right? Well, if the United States had actually any moral backbone, they would cut off Saudi Arabia forever or threaten them and say, we're not dealing with you anymore. We have oil reserves here in the States. But what they don't want to do is lose them to a country like Soviet Union or Russia or Japan or China, because that was the threat during the mid 1960s, 70s, when Saudi Arabia gave the United States the oil embargo in regards to changing their political attitudes toward Israel. So they pressured the United States. It took them a long time to realize, hey, we can actually control U.S. government if we just said, oh, we're going to make a shortage of our oil production. And they did. And oil prices skyrocketed. And of course, the American people rely on oil, heat, gas, the cars and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, people basically say, hey, we need the oil. We need it. We just need it. Right? What is the one of the last lines in the movie Last Days of the Condor, where Robert Redford, talks with the CIA asset, and at the end, the asset tells him, what do you think they're going to do? We play these games. We talk about the Middle East and stuff. What do you think they do when the Americans can't get their oil? It's not like they can't get it. They'll want us to get it. And basically, that movie is fiction, but it's based on reality. And that's one of the reasons. It's a major reason, but it's not the only reason.
There are a series of policy questions here, sir, as well, in terms of how the transformation of these societies occurs so that they don't remain as feeding grounds of terrorists, but you've got to engage.
Well, let's move to Congress.
Yeah, and the most important question of all, why did they attack us? Well, according to the State Department, they attacked us because they hate our freedoms. That's coming from Bush himself, right? That's the Bush White House, the neocons, right? Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Condoleezza Rice, the Vulcans, they nicknamed themselves. Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, the real ghouls of human history, right? And no, that wasn't the case, because all you have to do is listen. Now, look, I'm not protecting people like Ramzi Youssef or Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. These are criminals. These are monsters, right? All right. But why are they attacking us? Why did they bomb the World Trade Center in 1993? Why did they bomb the World Trade Center in 2001? Why did they attack us in the Khobar Towers? Why did they attack us on the Millennium Plot, Bajinka, okay? Our foreign policy. Now we're looking at the bigger picture here, okay? Our foreign policy, because God forbid, if the American people got a brain and stopped fighting each other and stopped looking at each other as the enemy and basically turned around and said, hey, listen, basically our foreign policy is hurting Arabs around the world. Why is that? Well, now we're directing the attention to who? The Gulf and Israel. End of story. It's not anti-Semitic to say it, all right? The policies of Israel, which is coming from the Likud party, which is the main party in Israel, which are nationalists. Guess what? We have our own Likud party here in the United States. They're called the evangelical Christians. That's why the Jews here in the United States basically don't want to move back to Israel because they're nut jobs. Not every Jew in Israel is a Zionist. You have a number of Jews who are speaking out currently against the government. They want a two-state solution. There's no problem living with Arabs, but you have the people at the highest levels of government who are basically making those decisions not to basically give Palestinians their due. Why? Because it comes from decades and decades and decades of oppression. Screw them. We want an Israeli state, and we'll take it by force. That's the words of Naftali Bennett before he became prime minister. That's the words of Benjamin Netanyahu. You know, and there's worse Likudniks in government than Netanyahu. But the biggest Zionists in the world are the evangelical Christians, and there's over 100 million of them. The biggest voting bloc in the United States, far none. Now we look at foreign policy, we try to make the correct changes. Hey, maybe Iran is not our enemy. Maybe Syria is not our enemy. Maybe Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Pakistan. Well, Pakistan is the enemy. These countries aren't the enemy. Hey, wait a minute. The biggest exporter of terrorism, Saudi Arabia. Hey, that's the Wahhabi ideology. They gave us Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, Boko Haram, Abu Sayyaf. Hey, Israel. Basically, they use us basically as the military arm to agitate countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, Jordan, and that's coming from the Oded Yanan plan. The Project for New American Century, which are basically constructed by dual Israeli citizens, in which they want to use the Middle East as the platform to expand militarily. And by doing that and putting in Western-backed governments, the Arab community won't concentrate on the issue of Palestine. Because all these Arab governments that don't talk about Palestine are basically Zionist puppets, American puppets. That's all they are. That's why they're hypocrites.
It seems to me that we have had national intelligence estimates at least since the mid-90s telling us about our vulnerabilities, mentioning the vulnerabilities of places like Washington, D.C., and New York. We've had various commissions talk about this. We've been very slow to react. While some individual voices, I remember Senator Lugar back during his presidential campaign, mid-90s, was talking about these things. Nobody paid any attention to those things. National security issues were like 3% in public opinion polls. And we responded, both branches of government responded accordingly. You mentioned our history in terms of appropriations, and I wish you could clarify, perhaps all of you gentlemen, this issue a bit for me. I look at these charts that you have there, and I see chart 3, I believe, counterterrorism money appropriated to the intelligence community. And I know we can't talk about real numbers here. I don't have charts. You got the big supplemental in '99.
Sir,
yes.
I don't have your charts, but
well, let me generalize. I think you'll agree with me. It looks like for the intelligence community, generally speaking, there's been an upward trend in terms of counterterrorism money. I think you acknowledged that earlier. The CIA, I look from the last decade, your appropriation has been at least as much as your request, and about every year. 95 was an exception. a lot of years, your appropriation was more than the request if you include supplementals in the later year. Is it a fact that intelligence appropriations in general have been going down while counterterrorism funding has been going up? And if so, what are we to make of that? Does that mean that we should not have been hamstrung in any way in terms of our counterterrorism efforts? Were you robbing Peter to pay Paul? Does that mean that while we're all focused on counterterrorism issues, that there are some extremely important things out there not being done that may turn around and bite us in future years? What are these numbers? What are we to take from these numbers?
Well, it means all of those things. The other thing that I would take from those numbers is when you look back and reflect on where this all started, we had to do 3 or 4 things simultaneously. One, you had to pursue this target, and the other targets that you say are important and indeed are important. You had to fix your infrastructure, you had to grow your workforce, and you had to resuscitate, in our case, you had to resuscitate your human intelligence capability, because the peace dividend in the 90s basically said, we're not doing this anymore. You know, I had in 1997, we had a strategic plan to resuscitate all aspects of this. And, you know, there's a cost associated to it. Now, there were budget caps.
You had to rebuild your clandestine services. You had satellite difficulties that you otherwise
Sir, the only
have.
point I would make about the supplementals is the reason we got where we needed is Congress gave us those supplementals. It's an appropriated.
But intelligence cannot live on supplementals.
No, sir. The point is it's either programmatic and it's deep and it's long, or basically what happens when you get a supplemental. And then the question is, the next year, when the budget submission doesn't reflect the supplemental or its operational tempo, we're starting all over again from the same place. You knew it, and we knew it.
Is not conducive to long-range planning.
No, sir.
Moving to your own agencies, you've talked about. We've talked about the deficiencies. I think one of the greatest concerns that we have in looking forward and trying to decide where we need to make our improvements still has to do with the gaps. You know, it's interesting that there are some memos, some public, some not public, that indicate that each of your agencies have had outstanding people doing outstanding work, and we're right on the money, and we're pulling things together the way they should and drawing conclusions they should have drawn. But some cases wasn't disseminated properly, some cases wasn't handed off to the right people, et cetera, et cetera. We know the story, but it's not like that there are not individuals out there that are incapable of doing this. It seems to be a systematic problem. And I'm wondering where we stand with regard to that. My concern is this, that basically it's a coordination issue. We've seen instances, and we know of other instances that we've not had public, where there have been gaps. We've got a system, we all know we have a system of foreign is over here and domestic is over here, and we're supposed to hand things off. We also know that we have a system whereby the lead agency here, the FBI, that is going to be charged with looking at this threat domestically and doing something about it, has always been a law enforcement agency. My concern is that we're asking the FBI to change its nature on a dime, as it were, from an after-the-fact investigative body that has been legendary for years and years in this country to a before-the-fact prevention body. And we think perhaps that by making some organizational changes at the top and by having some joint task force and things like that, that will change the culture. But the FBI has certain limitations. because it's a law enforcement body, essentially. For example, when you're looking at someone, you know, you look at them, if you don't have hard evidence, you can look at them as in terms of a preliminary inquiry for how many days? So many days. Then you have to either open up a full field investigation on them or drop it altogether. I'm wondering what motivation in an organization that's like this, what motivation in an organization that rewards cases being made and people are known and rewarded and recognized for the cases that they're made and cases they work on, what motivation is it for people around the country in the various offices to be handing up tidbits of information that doesn't necessarily make any sense to them? They don't know whether or not somebody else needs it. They know maybe they're supposed to coordinate with everyone, but our investigators are still talking to agents out in the field who don't feel any real sense of reprioritization out in the field. It's a culture. It's not necessarily, I'm convinced that it's not a matter of turf as such. It's not a matter that people deliberately try to keep things from people, but you have.
Well, with the CIA, they deliberately didn't give information to the FBI. It was deliberate. And that's coming from one of the CIA case officers named Clark Shannon, who met with 2 FBI agents in New York regarding information of Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hadmi, in which he told them, and that's coming from the Joint House Inquiry panelists, and he told them that he had orders not to share that information with the FBI. Now, look, this is a systematic problem, right? Take, for example, the FBI, right? They have a bureaucratic problem in regards to their superiors and the people on the field, right? CIA also has this problem where they hate management, which is called the 7th floor, right, of their office's management. That's Cofer Black, it's Michael Scheuer, that's George Tenet, that's James Pavitt, John McLaughlin, et cetera, right? All those guys. Now, a lot of those guys are management material. Very few of them come from the field level and make management. Now, in the mid-1990s, George Tenet basically fired or forced retirement on a lot of the field agents, right? And why did he do that? Well, basically, what happened was Tenet was a brown noser. And this is coming from Gary Bernstein in his book Jawbreaker, who complained that Tenet wasn't very liked by certain individuals on the field because he basically didn't regard field officers as important enough as, say, management or someone who in Langley is trained either to be in the field or in an office. And that the office people were basically people who can be closer to management. A lot of these case officers on the field are in, far away places where they can't be near management, so they can't brown nose, right? So a lot of these case officers, same thing with the FBI, right? All right, for example, the Zacharias Passawi case, right? Now I interviewed Colleen Rowley once, and Colleen Rowley basically said that she drafted a memo regarding a complaint to Director Mueller here, in which she said that we tried to gain access to Zacharias Passawi's laptop, but because the arresting officer, Harry Sammet, who filed a FISA warrant, in which he had more than enough evidence to show that Moussaoui was controlled by foreign agents and was under under guidance by foreign terrorists, say Abu Hamza al-Masri in France, and basically fought alongside Ibn Khattab in Chechnya, which is where Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hadmi went. That right there shows a connection to Al-Qaeda, and we could have opened the laptop, but they said no, right? Why? Well, you didn't have enough evidence to show there was a warrant. And basically, they manipulated the application as to where instead of a criminal one, it was an investigative one. And so that wasn't enough for the FISA warrant. Well, guess when they opened up the laptop? One day after September 11, 2001. So yeah, there's a difference. This is a bureaucratic problem. And when you have bureaucrats, you have shady people working at the top levels. Now, this is not a generalization. I'm only using this as a specific example of where bureaucrats got in the way of actual investigative work by true investigative agents like Harry Samet or Colleen Rowley or Mark Rossini or Doug Miller or Ken Williams or Robert Wright Jr., right? Real whistleblowers, these guys. Or if you're in the NSA, Thomas Drake, and he was a senior executive. William Binney, Kirk J. Wiebe, Ed Loomis. These guys blew the whistle on the NSA overstepping their bounds regarding collecting of data without a warrant or protection of the individual in which that information was coming from. They just took the information without protecting the identity of the person, right? It's worse now. It is much worse what these intelligence agencies do, but because you, the public, don't concentrate on this because it's really not your fault, right? You don't know anything about the Five Eyes. You don't know what that is. You don't know what the intricacies of the NSA are, and that they have a Utah data center, which is basically one gigantic plaza that basically stores all your emails, text messages, phone calls, in which they say they don't do anymore. But I'm not trusting them. Are you? What is that place doing there? You're not asking questions about that, and you're not going to learn that from the media because they're complicit in all this.
Practices such as sources and methods principles, need to know principles, things of that nature. You're trying to change an awful lot, Mr. Mueller, it looks to me like, to cure your own problems, and then you're going to have to take the extra step, all of you together, to fill in these gaps. Yeah. When each of you have your own analysts, each of you have your own piece. We don't know whether or not it's going to work. I can't say it won't. You can't say that it will. But it looks to me like that there's something to be said for perhaps another entity that is analysis oriented. That does not have law enforcement responsibilities or even collection responsibilities, but is analysis oriented, that has the authority to task gaps as they find them. I don't think we have anything like that tonight. I don't know whether that's comparable to MI5 or any other models. I know it's difficult as we go along to maybe recognize that the structure that we know perhaps is not the one that needs to take us into this century, and I know that I'm laying an awful lot on the table here with one question. But I'm asking I'll stop now and ask your thoughts on all of that. Do you really feel like the things you're doing now are going to cause this long history and these monumental difficulties to change? And can't we do better with a different pattern?
Well, let me start by addressing the issue of the culture. A lot of people talk about FBI culture of not sharing and the like, and it was best expressed in my mind by Nancy Savage, who testified. She's head of the Agents Association. She testified with appropriations last year, and on the issue, she said the FBI culture is one of hard work, dedication to the citizens of this country, and excellence in its endeavors, which I think is the best I've heard in terms of FBI describing the FBI culture. Let me start from distinguishing between collection and the analysis. I would be the first to concede that we have not done a good job in analysis. We have not had either the technology nor the analytical cadre of individuals that we have needed to do the analysis and which you're describing. I'm not certain that a separate agency would satisfy that. In fact, I think it would institutionalize that which we're trying to prevent, and that is compartmentalization. Because I absolutely believe that the analytical cadre that is looking at the facts ought to have the tasking ability, ought to have integration with the tactical analysts as well as the agents so that they become familiar with the information that they're getting and digesting and upon which they are doing the analytical piece. You look at an FBI agent, one FBI agent is good. An FBI agent is good at doing investigations. And those investigations can be in counterintelligence. We've done those for a number of years. where you run a counterintelligence investigation in trying to determine what attack the Russians or some other country is trying to make on our
But
infrastructure.
this is a different deal, isn't it? I mean, we know now that we're dealing with a different kind of enemy that lies there perhaps for years, secretly planning, that we've not been able to necessarily infiltrate very much. Isn't that a different situation we're facing?
No, you're looking at it from the intelligence point of view. And how do you expand on your knowledge of the persons? You don't arrest them right away because you want to find out who else is in that network, turn them against each other. And that is something that we've been doing for a number of years. But as collectors, I think the FBI agents are the finest collectors of intelligence in the world. Now, one of the things that we have to do, and I think is changing since September 11th, is for agents who are very good in the criminal sphere to look at a piece of information and not run it through the sifting that you do to determine whether it would be admissible in court. In other words, is it hearsay? Well, I'm going to thrust it aside. Do I lack a foundation? And therefore, I'm going to disregard that. And we are changing to have everyone in the organization understand that a piece of information is a piece of information that has to be put into a matrix and looked at as a whole. But in terms of the collection, I don't think they're any better around. And to set up another institution to do collection with the United States is fraught with difficulties in my mind.
Well, then the problem begins with the supervisors of, like, say, Minnesota, right? Or Phoenix or New York, right? Now, New York is considered the best counterterrorism center in regards to the FBI in the United States, right? They have experience with terrorism, counterterrorism regarding the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. And of course, the first terrorism attack, which many people don't realize, is El Sayed Noseir's assassination of Rabbi Meir Kahane. All right. Now we're talking about older Arab fundamentalists, which were predating Al Qaeda. Who are these people? Right? Do we investigate the older selves like Abu Nidal, Fatah? Right? They were inside the United States. I mean, DJ Thermal Detonator, he speaks on this issue more than anybody probably that I know of in the world. So where was the FBI regarding that? All right, it's not like you guys basically could create this excuse saying we just didn't have the manpower. We just didn't have the manpower. We didn't have the analytical data. You guys had enough data to stop certain events from happening. And that's the facts, right? It comes out later, many years later, where it shows the data say, hey, wait a minute, we could have probably suspended the 93 World Trade Center bombing. We probably could have. We had enough data to suggest that, but no, and more so with 9/11. So it's not a matter of the agents, it's a matter of management. And who controls management? Well, that's the question, right? Where does management get their orders from? Well, in regards to people like Robert Mueller, they have friends in federal government, and those federal governments have also lobbyists, and those lobbyists are not necessarily inside the United States either.
You then would have another institution that is developing sources in the community, and sources that may provide information on terrorist matters may be involved in criminal enterprises, whether it be narcotics or food stamp fraud, which we have found. And you will be divorcing those collection pieces from each other and, again, stovepiping it. The use of technical resources where you're doing interceptions and the like. I have heard stories, not good stories, not necessarily horror stories, about other countries that have this dual setup where there has been the failure to pass off from the intelligence community to the law enforcement community that has resulted in disasters in terms of being able to prevent attacks. One other thing that I would mention just for a second, and that is it's important in this day and age that we be integrated with our counterparts overseas. And in every country I've visited, Middle East, Southeast Asia, There is, our counterpart will be either a primary law enforcement counterpart or an intelligence counterpart with whom George will have the discussions. But it is important as we proceed and gather the intelligence that we develop these relationships with our counterparts overseas. And we have developed through our legates and our expanded legates those associations that enable us to get intelligence from our law enforcement components. If there is a separate entity in the United States, we will be lacking and missing, I believe, the benefit of all those contacts that we develop in the law enforcement community around the world to supplement what George has in the intelligence community.
I take your point, Mr. Mueller. I'm impinging on others' time. I apologize, Chairman.
Yeah,
and
I'll
the-
stop
and
right
my-
there
my
because that's the
colleagues.
end. Anyway, regards to gaining information from informants, well, the FBI is the leading agency in that. And you only need to look at La Cosa Nostra. How many informants were inside the Gambino crime family, the Colombo crime family? I mean, there was tons of people that they turned in regards to, and it wouldn't be hard regarding Middle East structure or terrorist structures. They're not as structured as, these Italian mobsters, where they had decades and decades of experience. For example, Al-Qaeda. It's not that hard to infiltrate that group. I mean, you had a British agent by the name of Ayman Dean, who basically wrote a book called 9 Lives, which basically talks about him involving himself with the group. And he met with Mohammed Ataf, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ayman al-Zawahiri, and Osama bin Laden. The hierarchy of Al-Qaeda. How hard is it? Well, it couldn't be that hard because according to the 9/11 Commission report, that's how the Hamburg cell went to Afghanistan, right? How they got to Afghanistan is now unexplained because Mohammed al-Slahi, who basically was used as the conduit by the federal government, was basically released on all charges, and he never was involved with Al-Qaeda in the mid-90s at all. So he basically didn't meet with members of the Hamburg cell. That's what the 9/11 Commission reported. So now there's a big hole, right? So the Hamburg cell goes to Afghanistan in 1999 and meets with who? Ayman al-Zawahiri, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Osama bin Laden. See how hard it is to meet these people? Ain't hard at all, right? So I don't want to hear about these groups are impenetrable or it's hard to penetrate these groups. No, it's not. And when you penetrate these groups and you do it with, Arab linguists who basically look like these people, sound like these people, and they're believable, or you get informants within these groups and you get information from these people about the nature of operations they're planning, guess what? Now you have foreknowledge. Now you can manipulate the operation beforehand. Is that what happened on 9/11? I don't know. I can only speculate that is true, that Al-Qaeda did 9/11. They planned 9/11, but that the U.S. and Israelis manipulated the plot because they got foreknowledge regarding their intelligence agencies because they were talking about it on phone. That's the reason why you don't see Michael Hayden getting any questions in any of these breakdown videos I do. You basically never hear from him because they gave him a pass. That's what happened. So I'll see you at the next breakdown.